Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News to bring you a discussion that I recently had with Dr. Dayan Goodenowe, who is a Canadian scientist that has relocated to the United States, where he runs a research institute focused on attaining and maintaining health at the biochemical level. I was first introduced to Dr. Goodenowe's work by Tracy Zimmerman, whose story I featured a few weeks ago from the United Health Conference in Toronto, where she was sharing her experience using some of Dr. Goodenowe's innovative treatments and therapies to alleviate the neurological adverse effects she was suffering after 2 Moderna COVID-19 shots. Dr. Goodenowe says that health is a singularity. By having a well-established baseline of what health is, using centuries worth of clinical trial research, it means that he can better focus his research efforts on discovering and addressing the deviations of health that can lead to disease. He does this work on a cellular level and has developed innovative technologies, patents, and therapies to help others correct, prevent, or repair these deviations. Let's hear it from Dr. Goodenowe himself on where he got started and why. Check it out.
So my background is in biochemistry and chemistry. So my initial training is in synthetic organic chemistry, and then my PhD is actually in psychiatric medicine, looking at the biochemical basis of psychiatric disease. So try to understand how the brain works at the biochemical level. And when I started doing this work in the 90s, the genomics revolution was just picking up, where people were sequencing full genomes. And they're trying to understand, is there a gene for this, or is there a gene for that, or how do genes predict, outcomes? And we did a lot of that work in animals and plants. But the problem is that we could sequence these entire genomes, but that wouldn't give us information as to the actual activity of the biological system at that point in time. And in order to do that, we need to look at a large base of small molecules or biochemistry, like your glucose and your homocysteines and stuff like that. But there's no technology available that could measure thousands and thousands of these simultaneously. So that was my first patented invention, was a concept called non-targeted metabolic profiling. And so we use this big ion cyclotron mass spectrometer that we can measure thousands and thousands of molecules simultaneously. And we can compare people with, a disease, say Alzheimer's versus no disease, or someone with colon cancer versus without colon cancer. And we can ask the question, if there is a physiological difference that you can see between person A and person B, and since we are fundamentally biochemical in nature, there should be a biochemical correlate of the things that we see in front of us. And the fact is that's true. And we see, so this technology was very powerful, identifying biochemical changes that were associated with different clinical outcomes. And one of those was, impaired cognition, or dementia, or Alzheimer's disease, as you would know, the different words we use for it. And we looked at the correlation between cognition and blood work. A certain class of molecules called Plasmalogens were revealed as being correlated with someone's cognitive ability, which was pretty exciting. And then we thought, so when you find a biomarker or an association, the first question is this just a coincidence, or is it linked to causation of that process? And to try to understand causation really deals with more of a temporal perspective, right? If I have this insult now, and I'm healthy, even though I'm living with an insult, does this change my risk of some adverse event in the future? So can it predict my future outcomes? And that kind of gives you an idea that this is involved in the actual causation, and it's not happening after you get the disease. Because sometimes when you get a disease, the disease itself has its own life and storm associated with it. And so it will actually cause consequences as a consequence of the disease. So these plasmalogens, as we dig deeper and deeper into them, it became very clear that they're actually a core component of this causation pathway, and that it's causing, when we get depleted in these levels, it gets, puts it at higher risk. And if you trace this story, the story about plasmalogens actually starts about 8 weeks prior to birth. That's when the human brain starts laying plasmalogens out on top of your neurons to insulate them. And so this is also why premature birth is associated with brain issues and poor outcomes and then certain malnutrition states in children. So even when you get to autism, you can look at the myelination of the brain, and it's associated with plasmalogen deficiencies. So fast forward to the long-term future, these are where they come in. So my interest in this whole area kind of came in organically. It's at first you think, you're a scientist, you think you're going to solve everything and you're going to outsmart human biochemistry. And at first we thought we'd find these diagnostic markers of disease, which we did. But we later found this was really, we were finding markers that were changing before people got the disease.
So Dr. Goodenowe unearthed biomarkers responsible for disease and could predict adverse health afflictions with this discovery of plasmalogens. But what exactly is a plasmalogen and why are they so important, especially in the context of COVID-19 and the seemingly damaging effects of the spike protein? Let's hear Dr. Goodenowe explain.
So plasmalogens are one of the critical membrane building blocks. It's what your body uses to separate things, but also things have to be able to go in and out. Like you have to have doors and windows that allow material to go in and out of these compartments of your body. And plasmalogens are critical for that. And so they have two main roles in this membrane structure. One is the insulation of your neurons. So your neurologens, your brain, your heart, your lungs, the endothelial cells of your gut, these have high levels of plasmalogens. And they do certainly slightly different purposes. And that's kind of where the plasmalogen thing comes in. And then the other big component of human physiology is energy. I tell people humans are basically hybrid electric cars. Like we take a hydrocarbon and we burn it, just like your furnace of your house burns it or your car engine burns a hydrocarbon into carbon dioxide and water. We breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and the oxygen gets converted to water, which we pee out, and we burn energy, and that energy gets released. And that process happens in our cells, little subcellular organelles called mitochondria. And so we use that energy, we capture that energy from the cell. So when you're dealing with any kind of insult, so the COVID, the spike protein gets the virus or the protein itself into the cells through a specific receptor called the ACE2 receptor. Now that receptor is going to be differentially expressed. There's going to be certain parts of your body that have higher levels of that. And so they're going to be more susceptible to either the vaccine or the virus itself, because that's the mechanism through which this particular agent works. And just so happens that the areas of your body that have the highest concentrations of this ACE2 receptor is your heart, your lungs, brain, and some of your endothelial cells. And so that's why those particular parts of your body are most likely affected. So that's why we're seeing, people with the reduced oxygenation, the severe cytokine storm, for example, for lung function, or the myocarditis and the instant death of the heart. And then you have the brain neurological function, is because that's targeting those systems. So the question is, obviously, it doesn't have 100% adverse reaction rate, right? Everyone. So some people, obviously so if we know that not everybody gets negatively affected, that means that there is within the human population a mechanism to detoxify or to tolerate it, because it's not affecting 100% of the people. And so the fact that some people can survive it and comfortably and don't even know that they have it means that there is endogenous systems capable of dealing with it. And that is like any other insult. So how the vaccine or the virus works is it enters those cells and it creates stress. It's a mitochondrial stressor, inflammation. So neutrophils go up and your oxidative stress markers go up, and your body starts trying to adapt and, I wouldn't say fight it off, but basically survive under that circumstance. And if it can't do that, it creates what's basically the equivalent of an autoimmune disease. Because if you can't tolerate it, then it spreads out and it tries to dilute itself by spreading to farther and farther cells. So back to this whole situation. So that's why there's a whole bunch of things out there, like curcuminoids, N-acetylcysteines, B vitamins, vitamin Ds, these, like a lot of these things and they all have a CoQ10, these things that actually help mitochondrial function improve. if you can boost your mitochondrial function, you can reduce the oxidative stress in your body, and that can blunt that inflammatory cascade. But what you're really doing is you're giving your cells a bit more energy, bit more capacity to fight their battle. And some people will have endogenously higher capability and some will not. So some will need more help than others. Then the plasmalogen component becomes critical because that's one of your critical membrane components. And the other component that plasmalogens do, it's your main antioxidant of the body for lipids. When you get hit too long with an insult like COVID or the vaccine, and you can't, your body starts adapting to keep you alive, and it starts lowering your functionality. So people get the brain fog, they get the lethargy. Basically, the body's telling us stop moving, stop doing these things because we have adapted to a lower state of function. And so you have to systematically reverse that process. The body has to be healthy and then realize, oh, you know what, I can start doing these things again.
To get back to health and reestablish a decent enough baseline where one can function and optimize their life, you're in the States, you are Canadian, but you practice and you work out of the States. What is available for Canadians? And I mean, I know that there's probably a broad array of things that would be required, but what's a price point? What does a price point look like for someone trying to seek out treatment, even if it's just a blood analysis and a couple supplements to get them on the road to recovery?
Right. So the blood testing that we do at Proteome Sciences and then at the Dr. Goodenowe Research Institute here in Temecula, it ranges. So we try to work through doctors as much as possible. So we have a kind of a network or a distribution model through roughly 1,000 doctors out there. I always try to get people to find an informed doctor because doctors have multiple experiences and everyone's personal situation is always unique to them. So the blood testing, I think, is around $500. You caught me on questioning on pricing point. The plasmalogen supplements, you can get them on Amazon. They're I think the neuro, which is the omega-3 that is for neurological function and neuromuscular function, I think it retails at around $200. The glia, which is basically the active ingredient in human breast milk that's for myelination, we use in autism and MS and so on and so forth. I think it's cheaper, it's like $100 because it only uses the omega-9 plasmalogens. And then N-acetylcysteines and carnitines, CoQ10s, you can get them anywhere. You know, we want to increase methyltransferase. So there's understanding your biochemical stress. You know, that's where the blood test comes in. You know, it helps you focus on which part of your system failed. And then so a lot of those are really inexpensive. Like even simple stuff like creatine that bodybuilders use, getting proper protein, phospholipids from, egg yolk, phospholipids, or even, soy or sunflower phospholipids for certain things are very important for liver and heart function. So there's actually a lot of simple things to do and those are usually relatively inexpensive. And so that's kind of where you can kind of do it yourself. Those things are available. Doctors are always, or practitioners are always your best bet because you get someone, not just yourself, looking over your shoulder and guiding you through that process. And then you can recover. Like we're in the business of recovering from disease, whether it's Alzheimer's or autism or COVID. People should have the expectation that they can get better.
Empowering people to take health into their own hands is exactly what many people in the post-COVID-19 world are seeking, as it becomes abundantly clear that the pharmaceutical lobby does not have a vested interest in creating cures, but rather customers, which makes work like Dr. Goodenow's that much more important to be aware and mindful of. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Research and efforts like Dr. Goodenow's are something that you probably won't hear about in the mainstream. If you appreciate the work that Rebel does to bring you the otherwise unreported side of the story and find topics that truly matter to you, then consider becoming a subscriber at rebelnewsplus.com, where you can watch full-length, in-depth TV-style shows, reports, and even documentaries. You can find out about all of that and more at rebelnewsplus.com.